That's right. I'm Mark Seifter.
And I'm Linda Zeiss Palmer.
And this is Arcane Mark.
Hello, everyone.
Welcome.
And welcome to Class Chat Cleric, the next episode in our series of episodes about the classes.
That's right. Alphabetically.
Alphabetically, indeed.
I guess when we get to the point where we're at the letter, like, I, we'll have to decide whether we're going to do all the core rulebook ones first, or continue alphabetically, even including the advanced
I think
player's
that when
guide.
we get to that point, we should probably ask the community what they would rather have us do.
That's a good point. So, that's not going to be for a while, though, because there sure are a lot of classes that start in the early alphabet.
Thanks for the sub, Rico.
So, let's take a look at the Cleric class. So, let's literally take a look at the Cleric.
It's Kyra.
It's Kyra.
Kyra's awesome.
Kyra is a pregen that everyone knows unless they don't.
Well, if you have certainly pre-generated Kyra is a mainstay at many Pathfinder Society tables.
They're actually like what says alphabetically as they should be. But the question is, which is alphabetical? Alphabetical from A to Z in the core rulebook, and then alphabetical in the advanced player's guide, or alphabetical over the course of all of them, keeping in mind that Secrets of Magic and Guns and Gears aren't out yet, and so therefore they will by necessity need to come after the other ones. So it will seem more orderly perhaps if we do all the core rulebook and then all the advanced player's guide, but it's not alphabetical entirely, so we'll figure it out.
We will.
Let's start like we do usually by just briefly going over some of the sort of story information about the cleric that is found in the class on the first page. So according to the core rulebook, the cleric for the cleric class, deities work their will upon the world in infinite ways, and you serve as one of their most stalwart mortal servants. Blessed with divine magic, you live the ideals of your faith. Adorn yourself with the symbols of your church, and train diligently to wield your deity's favored weapon. Your spells might protect and heal your allies, or they might punish foes and enemies of your faith, as your deity wills. Yours is a life of devotion, spreading the teachings of your faith through both word and deed. So that is what a cleric is. You're using divine magic. Now, as opposed to the bard, which we've done before, they're using occult magic, the magic that combines the spiritual along with the mental aspects. These are called essences. The cleric has spiritual essence with their divine magic, much like the bard's occult magic, but they also have life essence. So their magic is often about life or spirit, making them pretty amazing healers in almost any situation for that, but also granting a wide variety of other spells and effects, because the life essence is what gives you your instincts that are built in, that come with just being a living creature, as opposed to the mental essence, which can give you more of like the high rational thought. So in our last episode, we talked about the champion and the tenets and these codes that the champion follows. The cleric is really the other class that has the strongest, that has that strongest sense of these are the sorts of beliefs that they have. The druid isn't really any less so than the cleric, but the thing that they keep together is that all of those, the champion a divine caster, the cleric a divine caster, the druid a primal spellcaster, all use vital essence, because belief is important to both of those kinds of magic. So it's no surprise that they're the ones that are all tied together in that way.
Yeah. I think I was thinking about it more in terms of how you have things that are more specialized, right? With the cleric, there's so many different individual deities that have their own philosophies and expectations for their followers. Yep. But it's also not something that's necessarily always clear, and I think that's one of the interesting things in the setting, that the deities, while they have holy books and things like that, they don't like come down immediately the second that somebody does something that's a little bit off to be like, this is exactly how you're supposed to do that.
Excuse me, you may have messed up my teachings. Allow me to explicate myself.
There's a variety of different ways of practicing the faith traditions, and I think that clerics really show that most strongly. Of course, if a cleric goes in and is just completely defying the fundamental tenets of their deity, that's completely another story. But
That's right. We'll get to that when we get to the deity and anathema. So, talking about some of the expectations for role-playing the cleric, it says, during combat encounters, if you're a war priest, you'd balance between casting spells and attacking with your weapons, typically the favored weapon of your deity. If you're a cloistered cleric, you primarily cast spells. Most of your spells can boost, protect, or heal your allies. Depending on your deity, you get extra spells to heal your allies or harm your enemies. During social encounters, you might make diplomatic overtures or deliver impressive speeches. Because you're wise, you also pick up on falsehoods others tell. While exploring, you detect nearby magic and interpret any religious writing you come across. You might also concentrate on a protective spell for your allies in case of attack. After a battle or hazard, you might heal anyone who is hurt. In downtime, you might perform services at a temple, travel to spread the word of your deity, research scripture, celebrate holy days, or even found a new temple. You might visit the temples and holy places sacred to your faith and have an immediate affinity with other worshippers of your deity. You might know the teachings of your religion's holy texts and how they apply to a dilemma. You might cooperate with your allies, provided they don't ask you to go against divine will. Others probably find your devotion impressive, even if they don't understand it. They probably expect you to heal their wounds, and they probably rely on you to interact with other religious figures. So that's some of the basic expectations that we see here about the cleric class in general. So what do they got? Well, like the bard, they start with 8 hit points. The champion had 10. The alchemist also had 8, and the barbarian had 12 because they're just the barbarian. Their key ability is wisdom, and they're trained in perception, fortitude, and reflex, but expert in will. For their skills, just like the champion, they've got religion, they've got a skill determined by their deity, and then 2 extra. So they're very similar to the champion on that front. In terms of their attacks, they are trained in simple weapons, but also the favored weapon of their deity. If the deity's favorite weapon is uncommon, they gain access to it. Also, unarmed attacks, all armor, untrained in all armor, unless your doctrine alters this, and trained in unarmored defense. For spells, divine spell attacks and divine spell DCs, just as you might expect based on the bard, which we've seen before. So that's sort of their basic starting proficiencies. So what does the cleric do other than what they started with? Well, it's very parallel to the bard. They gain new spells at various levels, and they pull up different proficiencies that are around the same time as the bard. The bard goes a little bit farther into the resolve, but the cleric just innately uses wisdom instead of charisma, so is pretty good at will saves anyway. And the name of the ability to get 10th level spells is different because it's miraculous spells since you're exalted by your deity, but it all comes about pretty similarly, except there's a few other features that you get at first level, one of which is the one that Linda was talking about before. But let's talk about that last because it's the most complicated. So you have a divine font, which is perhaps the cleric's most signature ability. It's based on your charisma modifier. Your divine font gives you additional very high level heal spells each day, or harm spells if you are someone whose deity grants negative energy, which does not necessarily mean evil. Evil deities are more likely to be associated with it, but negative energy is not intrinsically evil, and positive energy is not intrinsically good. They are the 2 energies of life, the life essence that we were talking about. The destructive aspect of negative energy and the creative aspect of positive energy. And of course, there is an evil thing you can do with negative energy, which is force it to create instead of destroy. You probably could force positive energy to, destroy things instead of create.
I mean,
that's probably evil too.
Yeah.
It destroys undead because they're messed up.
Sort of canceling out, yeah.
Yeah, but you could, if you found a way to make it subtract and annihilate things, that's probably pretty evil. So that's the divine font. That's very important. Clerics also have a doctrine, which basically determines their proficiency increases. So when I said they're very similar to the bard, that's if you're the cloistered cleric, that they're pretty similar. If you're the war priest, there's some pretty significant differences because you wind up with a doctrine that is going to give you basically give you expert proficiency with your deity's favored weapon way before most other spellcasters are going to get their expert proficiency 4 levels sooner. But it delays your spell proficiency, and you never get to legendary as a result. However, you're better at more types of armor. Your fortitude saves eventually go up to master, and you can get a critical success on them instead of a success. So there's a lot to gain, but it's definitely not as good at casting spells against enemies or counteracting with its spells. So you have to be pretty careful and choose your spells wisely if you want to be a war priest. Get all the advantages you can from that. So then finally, last but not least, is deity and anathema. And that's what we were talking about before when Linda was saying they are similar to the champion in that way. So when you pick your deity determines some of the skills. We mentioned that before. It gives you some extra spells that are added to the divine list. It has lists of possible domains, which there are feats to sort of learn about your deity's domain, but the Cloister Cleric starts with one of them for free. It's a type of focus spell, like the Champion's Lay on Hand or the Bard's Composition focus spells. But the anathema for the cleric is something that the champion shares. The cleric is not quite as strong. It doesn't, or it's not quite as strong of a restriction, because the champion has all those tenets that you have to follow. With one of which is not to break do the things that are anathema to your deity. But the cleric only has to not do the things that are anathema to their deity. That's the only restriction. You probably should try to do the things that are edicts of your deity that they tell you that you probably should do. But your deity's not gonna kick you out for unless you're pretty egregious at not following the edicts. Whereas if you do something that's anathema to that deity, like raising an undead, if you worship Pharasma, the goddess of death and like the normal passage of souls to the afterlife.
And I would say that like if you're playing a cleric of a deity and your cleric just like never really seems to be doing the edict things, it's probably a good time to talk to your GM about maybe your character is having a situation where another deity might fit better, or they're not really invested in that faith. I know we had that happen with an elven cleric of Torag in one of my games, where it's like, you're not really doing any of these Torag things. So you had a situation to go to where you could have gone and like protected and helped a bunch of dwarves, but you went drinking instead. So like, maybe there'd be another deity that's a little bit better fit for your character.
It's worth noting that it's not one strike and you're out. If you perform enough acts that are anathema to your deity, or if your alignment changes to one that's not allowed by your deity, deities have alignment restrictions, you lose the magical abilities that come from your connection to the deity. The class features you lose are determined by the GM. They likely include your divine font and all divine spellcasting. These abilities can be regained only if you demonstrate your repentance by conducting an atone ritual. So, it's not a one strike and you're out, but certainly your deity is going to give you kind of like the hairy eyeball at any kind of time that you perform something that was distinctly anathema to that deity. So keep that in mind. And there's some deities that just don't care about that much and don't have that many things that are anathema to them. And that's okay too. So that's basically the basic structure of the cleric. It's worth spending a little bit of time to talk about those domains.
But you also talked about the core 4 classes. Were there special considerations that you had with the core 4 as opposed to like just any other class?
I mean, there's the fact that they were the first 4, so like the game had to function with those 4 working together. But I'm not sure if there's anything else that we've directly mentioned about the core 4 classes in other interviews or streams.
Fair enough.
So the domains that are available to the deities are generally ones that are based on sort of the overall areas of interest and concern of some of the major Golarian deities. And there were domains previously in Pathfinder 1st Edition that were inherited from Dungeons & Dragons 3rd Edition, but the domains from 2nd Edition are not. They are just whatever the deities said in their areas of concern and combined to try to make some coherent domains. This means that because of the fact that the core deities in Pathfinder 1st Edition had all of the deadly sins except Sloth, that all of the deadly sins except Sloth show up, although with their good PR versions of themselves, such as confidence instead of pride. But you know, there's all sorts of possibilities: ambition, air, cities, confidence, creation, darkness, death, destruction. There's something there for everyone, and if there's not enough in the core rulebook, there's more domains in Lost Omens, Gods, and Magic that can cover some of the additional deities.
And more deities, because...
So many more deities. So many.
Because WoW are there a lot of different deities.
It's not even... It doesn't even have all of the deities either.
I mean, even like the...
It didn't have the Imperial Lord that my character in our previous Monday night game worshipped, for example.
Yeah, but there's just so many of them.
There's too many. There's way too many Imperial Lords. And Demon Lords, especially. I think those are the two that have the most.
Yeah, I think you're right on
overall that. Of their category. So there's lots of choices for your deity. There's lots of choices for your domain. Your deity is going to have a few. And if you're using Lost Omens, Gods, and Magic, they may have some additional domains that are beyond the original ones that you can get with some feats that get you some of the more esoteric domains for your deity. Plus, you could form a splinter faith of your deity that has domains that are heretical for the main deity based on your beliefs of the splinter faith as well. And all of that is available in Lost Omens, Gods, and Magic. When we're coming to the core cleric, in addition to dealing with domains, they have a lot of feats that are either they have one that can boost up your favorite weapon that you can get if you are a war priest or you just want your favorite weapon to be cooler. If it's simple, it basically puts it up to martial so that you're not at a disadvantage for having a deity with a simple favorite weapon. There's things to increase your heal and your harm, a variety of them. Do more healing, do some extra healing, heal some other people, do some extra buffs with meta magic while you're healing, or do some things while you harm the undead, or maybe command the undead.
Identity has a comment about the deity options creating a lot of alternative proficiencies and spells and things like that are available to clerics.
That's right. They definitely can, because of the fact that they're all going to have their own different spells, and they might have their own different skills. So it's definitely very interesting way to do that. The clerics then continue with some more. They have some feats about emblazoning things on their shields or weapons to boost those up. Some interesting abilities based on attacking that are really good for the war priest, where you can castigate your enemies or replenish yourself based on with the replenishment of war. That's where a lot of their feats start out with, is in sort of one of those categories in the core rulebook. Of course, there's powerful high-level feats like, for example, the Avatar's audience, where you can just it's even more powerful in the story than it is mechanically. It's just like you're a lesser avatar of your deity, and you can just go around, and everyone knows that. You can commune without paying the cost. You can plane shift in there to see your deity with just using your religious symbol, and it just gives you're a lesser herald. That's what it is. So that's got a really strong story to it for 20th level. The other ones are Maker of Miracles, where you get another 10th level spell, always good, and a free meta magic with any heal or harm, which is very handy as a free action to add on to your character. So there's that, and then in the Advanced Player's Guide added a fair selection of additional options for the cleric in particular. Let's see. One of the main things that they gained was this is a spread of options, but there's a set of 4 feats based on premonitions where your deity sends you in a warning, and then you can potentially also apply it to the entire party. And so that's kind of a cool new thing for the cleric, but there's also a high-level feat, Miraculous Possibility, where you just sort of are like, I'm going to be flexible and just call out to my deity for whatever whatever I need right now. It's a lower level spell because it holds the divine potential of just like, I need my sword to light on fire or something. You cast any of the spells you know from the divine spell list, but it's multiple levels lower. There's also a bunch of additional options that are sort of based on the idea of being versatile with healing and harming. So, for example, there is a ebb and flow ability where you choose a creature that would be harmed by the spell and choose another creature that would be healed by the spell to heal or harm both of them. To harm your enemy and heal your ally. There's a high level feat called Remediate in there that lets you harness counterbalancing forces. So there's a lot of things about going against different forces in the Advanced Player's Guide, or about premonitions in general. But there's just other things that aren't any of those, like the second level reaction, rapid response, where your ally gets knocked out and you, as a reaction, stride towards them real fast because you know who needs to do that healing spell on them next turn.
It's the Cleric.
It's this guy. That's right. So, yeah, there's a lot of good stuff for the Cleric, both in the Advanced Player's Guide and in the core rulebook. Let's see.
So, we also typically have been talking about the archetypes, both the class archetype for the class itself, as well as other archetypes that go well for someone who's playing that class.
So let's look at the Cleric archetype.
Class archetype. Yeah.
I'm flipping to it as you said that. So here we have a Cleric archetype. So she looks like she's some kind of a, like maybe a mage or something, who's also a Cleric of, I don't know, maybe Deathis. And the Cleric dedication is very similar to the Bard in that it provides all the basic spellcasting and breadth, and it also has the ability to get basic and advanced dogma, which provide feats. So the main difference between the Cleric and the Bard is that the Bard also had counterperform and inspire courage's feats in addition, whereas the Cleric didn't need those, so it just doesn't have those. It has all the other things that the Bard has, but for Cleric spellcasting.
So I mean, naturally, the Cleric requires a fair bit of wisdom. So if you're a character who's already wants wisdom as a part of their build, then that's going to be a natural fit.
That's right. And honestly, at some point, you're likely to get up to a 14 wisdom anyway, at higher levels.
Yeah,
but then,
for sure.
But then you have to use a high level feat on Cleric dedication. Unless you're a human using that. But I
mean, if you're somebody who cares a lot about like perception and will saves and things like that, you might already have a. That's
right. Some of the suggestions on what to do with clerics is that you could do an alchemist cleric to be like a chirurgeon, lots of healing. Martial clerics to pick up a domain spell or some healing in a pinch. Divine sorcerer cleric to double down on their divine proficiencies to be the ultimate divine spellcasters in the core rulebook. Or other spellcaster clerics to diversify their options.
Yeah.
Like if you're a wizard cleric, like the example there, you can get some healing that your wizard is not going to be good at on its own.
I played a playtest barbarian with the cleric archetype, and it was very useful to have that little bit of spellcasting on the martial character. You know you're not necessarily going to have the world's best DCs if you've just got enough wisdom to qualify, but there's plenty of spells that are focused on buffing and getting utility and healing and things like that are super useful to have on a martial character to make your party more flexible.
That's right. Meanwhile, for clerics multi-classing into something else, the druid is a pretty good option for you. It's easy to get into it with the wisdom requirement, and you might be able to pick up wild shape or an animal, or well, maybe for an animal you go beastmaster, but you could potentially pick up wild shape, which still heightens ridiculously well, even though you can't get some of the highest level feats, so you can get some pretty darn powerful forms pretty easily, and as a cleric, it's pretty painless. Plus, you might have 14 charisma for your divine font, so you can get a bunch of heals, in which case the opposite of Sorcerer Cleric, in terms of being the ultimate divine caster, is Cleric Sorcerer, which does not have as many divine spells as Sorcerer Cleric, but has more heals at the top level, or Cleric Oracle.
Yes.
And
Cleric Life Oracle.
Similarly, Oracle Cleric in terms of who takes the Cleric dedication. So there's a lot of good overlap with Cleric Oracle because you probably have enough charisma to get into Oracle as well. And yes, Life Oracle has some pretty interesting and potentially useful revelation spells that you might be able to pick up. So those are some of the good ones for Cleric when it comes into multi-classing. Let's see. It says, there's just some things they're talking about, some weapon combinations that you can do. All right. I think that is basically what's going on with the Cleric.
I think that too with the Cleric, though, I mean, the deity can very much inform the direction that you're going with that.
Huge difference for the Cleric.
So I mean, there's a huge difference between what kind of multi-class is going to necessary archetype, or what other type of archetype is necessarily going to apply to a Cleric of Gorham versus a Cleric of Shelyn. And archetypes can really be a way to focus in more on what sort of fits into that deity's portfolio and specialize your skill, or conversely to be someone who breaks those expectations by saying, you know, my being a Cleric of Gorham already gives me some Gorham-based abilities, but I can take another archetype to represent a more nuanced aspect of my personality. There's so many good archetypes, other than the multi-class. I think, to say, because the deities really pull the class in some different directions.
If you're a Cleric of Gorham, you could take the Mauler archetype for two-handed weapons. And if you are Iomade, you might want to take the archetype for the shield-based archetype, which I think is the Sentinel, or you could take the Bastion, get heavy armor on the War Priest. There's a lot of good options, just depending on what deity you pick.
Yeah.
So the deity really flavors your choice. Even your domains can flavor the choice a lot. Your doctrine can really change what's good for you and what isn't.
Yeah.
Just because.
Are you a character that has invested a lot in the stats that are good to fight with weapons, or have you invested more in the spellcasting?
And ultimately, the simple but powerful ability to have a ton of heal spells on the Cleric, as opposed to like complicated compositional cantrips and abilities that the Bard uses to get some of the same place, makes it so that it's easy to explain what the Cleric has, and it's powerful, but a lot of the variety is in what divine spells you pick, what deity you pick.
Yes.
There's just a ton of ways to make a Cleric that's effective, and you, honestly, even the things we didn't name, you can't really go wrong with the Cleric, because you just, I mean, I guess you could. I would say that playing an 8 Charisma Cleric is probably a poor choice.
Mm-hmm.
It's not a good use of the fact that you now have 0 extra high-level heal spells per day. So you've kind of squandered Cleric's main special resource in terms of additional spells. But that's an ability score assignment thing. But in terms of like what archetypes and other things you add to the Cleric, you can't really go wrong. You just pick one that works well with what you're currently doing. So Roskman is asking about how do you build someone who in their backstory may have been an ex-Cleric, but they're not necessarily a Cleric now. I would say that you want to pick a background. So Gods and Magic has a background that says that you were raised and steeped in the faith of a deity, and it was written, basically, it works generically. Like, there were going to be one for every deity, and it was going to be repetitive, so I suggested to save space and have more information on the deities, that it's going to be, and it is, there's one background, and then each deity tells you what to insert into that background when it comes to the ability scores, and you already know what skill to gain, because it gives the deities skill that they give to the Cleric. Hey, that's good. And then the skill feat was just a skill feat, I think, like Assurance in the deity skill, or something like that. Something that generally fits. I can't remember exactly.
Yeah.
So, that background is the best way to do it. So you
also
say that, like, you were steeped in their faith to the point that you actually were ordained in it as part of your background, but then you turned aside from it. And that, I think, is the best mechanical way to be like, my backstory is I'm an ex-cleric, but of course I lost all my powers and I don't have any cleric things that are shown in my mechanics.
There's also sort of the idea of the cleric who changes faiths because of redemption or temptation or any number of other reasons. So you can have a cleric who, so for that you might go with, particularly if you're looking at someone who's a bit higher level, a cleric who is of one deity who has the story of having been of another deity. Maybe they have, say, an archetype that helps to reflect some of the abilities that they picked up.
And it looks like the second half of Rossman's question is about someone who is a little heretical for their deity. So we mentioned that before. In Gods and Magic, there is something you can take if you have a weird splinter faith of your deity that doesn't really follow the main path, where you work together with your GM to define, like, what is it has to be like a coherent, actual, additional belief system that there are people who are practicing, rather than just like, I found the domain that was the strongest and I added that to my deity and then that's the one I took. But it's in there and it's really great for telling stories about a different way to think about that deity than the main way that everybody else does. And so that would be a good way to handle the second half of your question about, like, an Urgathoan who thinks that undeath is not the best kind of immortality compared to other kinds, or a Goromite who thinks peace and war. The Goromite who thinks peace and war should be balanced is probably, like, a little more out there.
Yeah.
Because Urgathoa likes the undead, but she also really wants people to live forever and do their thing. And I think she could tolerate someone who thought that there was something better than undeath that was out there that you could do as long as it was similar. Whereas Gorham, I think, it's not even a splinter faith that to think that peace and war should be balanced. His whole deal is that there is no. And I think
it could be interesting to have, like, you know, say like a fighter or another character who still uses the favored weapon of the deity from before, and has some items that are around. Maybe they have some.
That's right.
Maybe they're really good at religion and they're fairly wise, and they have maybe some skill feats that are some medicine related skill feats that are sort of a reminder of the power that they used to have.
And as Indanity pointed out, syncretism is a cool way to do a sort of syncretic combination of multiple deities. In the old style that, like, in real world religion, there are sometimes syncretic combinations of multiple deities. And
there was also a mention of, like, of using Oracle as sort of like a having some kind of a remnant of a divine vessel that's no longer so focused.
Yeah, you definitely really could do that. Or a sorcerer who is like an angelic sorcerer. They have the blood of like the angels, but they have turned against their faith, but they still have some of the powers anyway. There's a lot of things you can do. Garden Variety Necromancer suggests you can have a splinter sect of someone who is so evil they were kicked out of a less evil religion. All right.
Or like the idea, or so some other story ideas, like Wither King mentioned a barbarian who has to pray to Gorham if he wants to go into or out of rage despite not liking his faith.
You definitely can play someone who's a reluctant follower of a deity. In fact, the Blessed One archetype in the Advanced Player's Guide even specifically is like, a deity singled you out and gave you this weird stuff. You may be really angry about this. But you may not want to be the chosen one, and you might be like, I'm not going to do anything that you say. But you might take it really respectfully, and either way you have the power.
Yeah.
Okie dokie. So I think that's it on the Cleric.
Sounds good.
Alright, so let's say goodbye to YouTube and then do our closing.
Bye!